My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue with the discussion on the conversation between Lord Yama and Nachiketa in the Katha Upanishad. As you know that, in this Upanishad, Nachiketa wanted to know what happens after death. And there's a lot of discussion that took place. And in the last class, we spoke about, the difference between the individual self and the cosmic self and how it manifests. And how the Paramatman or the Brahman is the formless, dimensionless, and how it, gave rise to the universe that we know, which has got form, dimensions, and also time. And there came from that universe emerge, the different forces of nature, the basic particles of the universe. Then from there emerge suns and stars and galaxies and nebulas. And one of the galaxy hosts multiple planets. And one of the planet is our Earth, which provided a conducive atmospheric conditions for life to form. And there are multitude of lives, biological from very basic to more complex, including we human beings as a species. And we came to that phase, and this cosmic womb or the Hiranyagarbha, which is spoken about in the scriptures, is emerged from this Brahman. So we spoke about this. And what is that Brahman? So here Lord Yama is giving the description of this formless, dimensionless, timeless substratum that gave rise to time and space and all those things that how we know the realities. Of course, in our universe, we have, because time is imprinted, we have birth, sustenance for a short while, and then dissolution. This happens in everything that is imprinted in this universe. So that's the nature of this universe. So you have, stars, galaxies that form, sustain for a while, and then they dissolve to form other things. The same thing with biological life. Conception takes place or fertilization takes place, and then you see there's growth for a period of time, and then you see dissolution, and you see decay, and eventually building blocks of that, energy that came together will dissolve. Eventually, it'll re-emerge back again. The same thing in human life. We see that fertilization takes place, the fetus forms, and then you see the human form takes place. The mother carries in the womb, somewhat like the Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic womb. Life, as we know, the biological life takes form, and then after 9 to 10 months, that life form emerges from the mother, and then there's continuous growth until a particular age, and then after that you see decline, then disease, and eventually death takes place, and the body disintegrates. What emerged and all the energy was assembled into form of a body eventually will dissolve, and that goes back again to Mother Nature and new life form. So this is the continuous cycle of birth, sustenance, and life in our universe because of space and time continuum. So here, Nachiketa is asking, but so he's asking this about birth, and then the sustenance for a while, and then dissolution. And so what happens after death? And this is the question that he had, and I want you to keep in mind. So Lord Yama is now explaining, and I gave some examples in the last class. So today I will reinforce that in a kind of a different way, and then bring some of the conversation that Lord Yama conveys to Nachiketa to reinforce the point of what happens after that. So, in the last session, we covered that think of this dark, this screen here that you're seeing is there is no form, there is no dimension, there is no time. Mahan calls it evil, and in this, that substratum is called Brahman or the cosmic self of the Atma. It doesn't have form, no time. So, for us to give that description, we are seeing the world in form and dimension and time. The best description that I can give you is this description. But another description of this Irul, which is formless, dimensionless, and timeless, happens in our deep sleep when our material form disappears, time disappears, our personality disappears. So think of this dark space as that Irul or that state where you have, you're transcendental to space and time. And this is what, think of this as a kind of a Paramatma, which is formless, dimensionless, the cosmic self. So here, Lord Yama explains that from there emerged this cosmic womb. So now, in that cosmic womb, we have, space and time forms, right? So this is the emergence of our universe that has got three-dimensional space and time. There may be other universes which has got different laws of physics, which I talked about multiverse in the last satsang. So say now this is what we call the cosmic womb or the Hiranyagarbha, right? In there emerge, like how that cosmic womb, you have that fertilization or that space and time is embedded to give rise to this big bang, that everything from the primordial seed, exploded to form our universe as we know it, this material universe. From there emerge our earth. I said, of course, there's a whole continuum. This took place about 13.8 billion years today, approximately, that we can estimate this. And our Earth, emerged about 4.5 billion years. So we can now look at, the dating, and time is really important. And within that, we see that life form, and one of the life form is human beings that took form from all the elements of nature, earth, and through fertilization, through the consumption of food, through the body having the DNA to assemble things to form that body, and within that body, that material consciousness that gave rise to eventually, when the child emerges from the mother, it forms, you have a human form, and this is true for most of the other biological beings, and then eventually it becomes independent of the mother and builds its own personality and and a way of life. And this is within that cosmic womb, right? So even though we emerge from our own mother's womb, we are all part of still the cosmic womb. Now, this is really important because that most human beings know, okay, we do everything in this world, there is space and time. Now, to really understand that Brahman, so most of us are so busy with our material world, that shapes our material personality. There's a lot of interactions from the time we wake up right up to the time we go to bed. We are continuously, immersed in this material world. And sometimes we miss that spark of that Brahman that is embedded in us, that gave rise to the cosmic womb and everything therein, including us. So the DNA is imprinted in everything in this universe, including us. But because the human mind is so preoccupied with these material interactions, fulfilling our desires, aspirations, we are always, our view and our lens is always outward to the material world. We get our happiness from all our material interactions. We try to get peace from our material interactions. We go through challenges through our material interactions and so on. So we caught up in this sukha dukkha cycles, and sometimes we miss the core, the essence of who we are. And here he explains that, for one to get there, Lord Yama says, yeah, now I know why most people are unable to get it, because they're so busy with interacting with the material world, trying to find this source from the material world, though the source is embedded in everything in this material world. But yet, one cannot cognize. And he says that the only way to cognize this Brahman, which is embedded in everything in this universe, from the cosmic womb to the Big Bang to all this energy and particles and suns and stars and the galaxies and nebulas and all biological being, that Brahman is embedded. But the human mind, the human beings also, the Brahman is embedded. But it cannot cognize because it's so focused on that material universe, the space and time, and caught up by the cycle, that the mind is unable to touch that core of that Brahman that exists within each one of us. So, what these great saints say is that, well, the way to realize that Brahman, that dark space, is try to go within us through deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, which means that makes the organ go back within the mind as opposed to fully, immersed in this material world. So this is the meditational prospect, the meditational approach. So here he says that this meditation, though we have a body, we have the vibration, it is to transition all our organs to the inward substratum, not the form. We can see the form in this picture, in the form of light, radiation, that silhouette. But he says within that dark space, that Brahman exists. So if you see in that form, outside looks kind of with light and all this material bombardment of these experiences. He says when the mind goes within, you see that the substratum within us and the substratum outside us looks the same. So that Irul, or the cosmic self, or the Brahman outside, when I first started, and inside are exactly the same. And here he explains this very nicely. He says that a wise person makes all his organs go back into the mind into the intellect, enlightening intellect into the collective intellect, the great self, the Hiranyagarbha. So you're moving from the material world to within our mind, that enlightening intellect, to be able to be quiet, to be able to understand the subtle forces within us, and ultimately that enlightening intellect into the collective intellect, which is actually our own self, that Hiranyagarbha, and ultimately, as we go deeper from the form to that formless, which is that self, the pure self, which is what you see outside, pitch, darkness, timeless, dimensionless, that exists in all of us. that is the core of our being. So here he's explaining this. So he's explaining this in this context on verse 14. He says that people who arise awake, he says, and meet wise people and learn from them about the self, not the form, that Brahman that is embedded in all of us. He says the scholars say the path to self-knowledge is hard to tread. He says, as walking on a razor sharp edge. He says, we get so caught up with the material thing, but to go inside, it's very tight because you push in one direction, the whole material world merges. You push in the other direction, you see that the material world disappears. But yet the mind gets caught up with the gravity of this materiality. So many people find it hard to dislodge themselves from that material thoughts, experiences, then eventually the material personality. So he says that, scholars say this path to self-knowledge is hard. That's because we spend a lot of our time, with the material world, experiencing the material world. So our mind is so drenched with this materiality. The gravity of materiality prevents us from touching the core within all of us. So here he says, why is it hard for people to grasp this? It is because of this duality. Though the Brahman, the cosmic self, is all of us, we get so caught up by the material world, which distracts us from discovering who we are, what our true form is. So then he goes on to explain to Nachiketa. He says, that Brahman that the arrow shows, that which is soundless, right? Touchless, formless, and orderless, that which is eternal. So what's within us in that dark space is exactly the same, characteristics of that cosmic self. He says that an eternal and undecaying. The form may to change from a fetus right up to the, more adult and ultimately dissolve. But he says that self within all of us, the dark substratum that the arrow is pointing, he says that this is undecaying, which is without beginning and without the end. Remember, I started off with Brahman, that dark substratum. You don't have space, no time, right? He says that is embedded in all of us. Because our mind is so distracted, we can't find it. We find it very hard to go inward to touch that core. He says, which is without the beginning and without the end. It's superior to the Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha is the cosmic womb because it transcends that cosmic womb. And constant, he said, having known that self, one can be free from death. So we see that when the mind is anchored on the form changes. So it's caught up by the materiality of birth and death. The moment the mind is anchored on that dark substratum, right, the Paramatma, you see that substratum and the external substratum, which is the Brahman, are exactly the same. Formless, dimensionless, timeless. So he goes on to explain that the goal of life is to know the self, right? But what is the self like? So he explains this. He says that if you look at the picture here, the dark, substratum which I put, he says that it has got no attributes, whereas the ones in the silhouette has attributes, as a form. Says. So he says without attributes, it is not like anything else we know, because when everything that we know is about form, body, personality, all those things, he says this is something that the material, the mind that is so caught up in material but here will not be able to experience this. He says this is why nothing positive is said in describing this. So we can't say it's difficult to explain this because it is not with it doesn't have any attributes. All the attributes is describing this material world. So we say it's a formless, dimensionless, tasteless, and so on. So he's now describing this Brahman, and we experience this every day in our deep sleep. And those who practice deep meditation will experience this state. One calls it the nothing state, the nothing state. So here he says this is beyond thought and speech. It's very difficult because speech itself, the vocabulary comes from our description of the material world. So he says that this is beyond thought and speech. He says the self is described as a superior, to the Hiranyagarbha, which is the cosmic womb, because the self is the cause and the Hiranyagarbha is the effect. So you see that Brahman, led to the manifestation of the Hiranyagarbha, which is actually the cosmic womb. And I said there are multiple universes. One of the universe is our universe, right? So he says that the effect is always dependent on the cause. So this is why we say that Brahman, which is formless, dimensionless, causeless, is superior to that material universe, which has space, time, and a cause. So he goes on to explain. So if you understand that, you see that when the mind is anchored on it, you see that the mind, as long as the mind has got material identity, you see that human personality, that silhouette. But when the mind goes deep inside, he says, and he explains that, he says, to know this self-knowledge is difficult because we are always caught up with this material world. We are bombarded by, things from the material world. The mind is so caught up by this. He says that self-knowledge is difficult for a ordinary human being. But he says the Upanishads and the ancient scriptures tell us that this is attainable. We can attain this. One who attains this, he says, that become free from birth and death. So this notion of, so he's explaining, Lord Yama is explaining that there is this duality. One is caught up by the material universe, which has got space and time. So if your mind is anchored on that, you'll always be asking, where did I come from and what am I going to do? What happens after the form disappears? But the other aspect is that the mind knows that it is that Brahman that is formless and dimensionless. So he says, when the mind attains that, it becomes free from birth and death. So the question of birth and death doesn't arise because the mind associates itself with that Irul or that cosmic self or that dark silhouette, the dark, space in there. So the mind, when it has that anchor, you see that material form disappears. The mind, before that, has got that humanly form. Through deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, the mind becomes one with that cosmic self, and that form disappears. It happens every day in our deep sleep. It happens when we undertake that deep meditational practice. So he's explaining how one can be transcendental to the materials, space and time, birth and death through this deep meditational practice. The moment he says that, then the whole truth is revealed. What happens after death? He says that the way to self-knowledge is difficult. He says, the only way to be free from birth and death is through understanding the scriptures and taking the journey within all of us to touch that core within all of us. Though we have that form, within that form there is a formless and dimensionless. When the mind anchors on that, the mind becomes transcendental. So he explains to Nachiketa, right, that, oh Nachiketa, if you anchor your mind onto that cosmic self, that birth and death is irrelevant, right? It is because your mind is no more caught in this material identity. So he says that not everyone will benefit from this. So he says that, the Lord of Death tells not everyone will benefit from this knowledge. Everybody can read it and so on, but they won't benefit it because it's still very theoretical. So he says only a serious minded person who's able to discriminate between what is right, and what is wrong, what is real and what is unreal, what is Maya, that which changes, and that does Maypurul, which is that which does not change. He says that, when one hears this and integrates this, you see that they will attain that cosmic self. He says that such person attains that status of Brahman, right? So he explains this. He says, but one needs to have a clear mind that is pure, clear, and understand this story that Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa, that everything emerged from Brahman, the cosmic womb that gave rise to our universe, and everything embedded in the universe also, with space and time and Maya, everything manifests from that. But within that change, there is something changeless. The only way to attain that, he says, is that one needs to undertake that deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, inward journey. And in that state, one attains the clarity of the nature of that self. It'll be difficult for one who does not do that intensive meditational practice. It'll sound like very mysterious, but he says that one who takes that step to transition the mind from being outside to within, you see that they will have a good understanding of what is real and what is unreal, what is changing and what is unchanging, and what is mortal and what is immortal, and ultimately realize that birth and death, one can become transcendental to it. So the question then is that, one attains that self. He says that requires self-discipline. To know the self, one needs to have self-discipline to make that mind pure and clear. And when one achieves that, one is able to grasp that self, which is elusive for many people because they're so caught up with their material personality that formless dimension self becomes so elusive, just slips away, right? So it says that when one practices this practice, self-discipline, bending the mind inward to get that state of clarity of thought, purity of thought, even the thought is not there anymore. He says that clear understanding of what is material and what is, eternal. He says that when one understands that, one will understand the nature of self, the illusion of death, birth and death. So he explains this very, very clearly. So again, one becomes free of that birth and death by attaining this knowledge and putting it into practice. So he says, you attain this state, this Brahman state, which is formless, dimensionless, that every day we go into our deep sleep state, yet we don't question what it is, right? Only through deep meditation, the mind is awake, in that awakening state of that cosmic self. For an ordinary human being, the mind is completely drenched in this material world that is continuously changing. For the enlightened one, the mind is completely enraptured by this cosmic self that the material personality completely is dissolved. One attains that universal peace. Mahan calls it the universal peace sanctuary. So this is what Lord Yama is explaining about the illusion of birth and death. It only happens if the mind is caught up in that material identity. The mind through this deep meditational practice, go within the mind, attains this transcendental nature of that self. So that is why every day allocate time for introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation to be in that state of Brahman, that cosmic self. If one attains that, you hit ultimate, even though when you are awake in the material world, that mind is still anchored on that cosmic self, that you become transcendental to that material personality and function beautifully in every state of our existence. With that, I stop. Sandosham.